Patrick, where are you dialing in from today?
So for the last 3 months, I've been in San Francisco, and usually I'm in Tokyo.
Very cool.
Are you in San Francisco for work for Vaccinate California?
Yep. Yeah. After about the first week of running it, it became pretty obvious that I was going to need more meetings on PST than Tokyo makes convenient, and so flew over for a couple of months, and then in a few weeks we'll fly back to Japan to be with my family.
Oh, nice. So you're based in Tokyo.
Yep, I've lived in Japan my entire adult life, 15 years now. Actually,
wow.
That answer is old. It's now 17 years. Time flies.
Where do you live in Tokyo?
I live in Nakameguro, which is close to Ebisu or Shibuya. Sure. You know either of them.
Cool. Yeah, nice.
I think we have one member who, at least when they joined, they were in Tokyo. A lot of people are just, traveling a lot, or at least traveled to somewhere else to kind of like ride out the pandemic. But I don't know if anyone's here. I don't remember who it was, but someone here is calling in from Tokyo.
Doesn't Ty live in Tokyo?
Is it Ty? Yeah. I wonder if he'll come. Anyway, I always feel bad because it's quite a time difference. And so when we have like events like these, our people in Asia are always up at like 3 a.m., 4 a.m. Maybe it's 2 a.m. there.
All right, looks like we're getting some more numbers. We're gonna kick off in about a minute or so. Where else are folks dialing in from today? If you want to kind of write in the chat or unmute yourself. Looks like Douglas, you're in Napa. Where are other folks dialing in from? New York, St. John, South Bay, Vancouver, Singapore, New Hampshire. Super cool to kind of get a snapshot of where SPC is located today.
Jared's on his farm in New Hampshire, right? Or farmhouse. We've been talking about doing a Club Park Commons meetup in this farmhouse in New Hampshire.
Happy to host. It's fun. Homemade hard cider.
Ooh, that's
awesome.
Exciting.
I think we have a good number of folks in, so let's get this started. For those of you who haven't met me, my name is Alvaro, and I'm incredibly excited to have Patrick McKenzie join us today for a fireside chat. This is going to be a riveting discussion about Patrick's work on Vaccinate California, a community-driven effort to source up-to-date and verified information about how to get the COVID vaccine. And we're also going to be exploring what building something new has meant for Patrick throughout his career, starting internet businesses, supporting entrepreneurs, and now leading a nonprofit effort. We're going to spend about 40 minutes today doing question and answers, and then I'll open it up to the questions so that you all can kind of unmute yourself or write in chat and share your questions with Patrick. During the event, feel free to share your questions in the Zoom chat. I'm going to be keeping an eye out on those, and we can field them towards the end. I think to fully kick us off, by means of formal introduction, Patrick McKenzie is the CEO of Vaccinate California. He has worked on economic empowerment through Stripe Atlas, accelerating entrepreneurship, and now privately on the COVID-19 response efforts. Known as Patio 11 on the internet, Patrick has written lots about the intersection of engineering and marketing, SaaS, and many other topics. I've personally learned a lot from his writings and Hacker News discussions over the years. And going through the process of incorporating my startup at the beginning of this year through Stripe Atlas, many of the incredibly useful guides on running a business were authored by him. So Patrick, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thanks very much for having me.
I'm sure a lot of people in the audience also know you through your writing on the internet. And in the last snapshot that you took, which is about a year old now, it looks like you're up to around 3 million or so words written publicly on the internet. So really curious to ask, why do you write, and how has writing influenced how you view your impact?
Well, I've written for a long time. I started writing for the internet in the summer of 2006. That's actually not true. I had participated on forums before that, but writing as an intentional practice in the summer of 2006. I was living in Japan at the time, and I had done well in high school and college in writing, was recommended to publish formally, et cetera, and thought, well, if I stay in Japan for a number of years and write 0 words, I'll probably lose my my facility with writing well in the English language. So I'm kicking off this new software project. I'll just blog about the software project as it goes along, just to force myself to continue writing every week. And that was the original plan. And then 3.5 million or so words later, here we are. I don't say that to brag, but just to just for context, folks, the Harry Potter series is 1,050,000 words. So I've been at it for a while. Some of it is more useful than others. It's one of the interesting things is that I probably could have written 90% less and still had as much impact, but didn't know which 10% was the impactful stuff when I started out in 2006.
That kind of number really frames your contributions there and puts it into perspective. And one of the places that you're very active, of course, is Twitter. And actually, in January, you sent out a tweet with an idea for a kind of hackathon-style project for technologists to engage with around kind of vaccine availability. And of course, this spurred Vaccinate California. What motivated you to send out that tweet, and how did you personally end up getting involved with the effort?
Sure. So if you can roll back a couple of months to what the situation was in early to mid January, we had finally had supply of the vaccine, and in various states, including the state of California, it was formally available to people who were over the age of 65 and older. But the news reports were flooded with people can't actually find the vaccine. They have to call 20 plus pharmacies sequentially to see if anybody has doses. And there was no website that was listing where it was available. And so out of sheer frustration that we have the probably best consumer-facing technology industry in the world in California and couldn't get a website out with addresses and phone numbers on it, I took to Twitter and said, somebody should just put up a website with the addresses and phone numbers. How hard can it be? There are a finite number of hospitals in San Francisco. Just call them all, put up the results. And then I put on a second tweet to say, you could crowdsource it, but it's really it'll be much more efficient if you just go down the list and call them. And Carl Yang, a technologist who I had never met before, sort of took up the torch. He got a Discord running. He started up a spreadsheet, and probably most importantly, he called 10 of his friends and said, hey, I'm working on a thing. I don't know what's going to happen, but let's try to get a list of all the California sites together. And they started hacking on it. And then he tagged me on Twitter. And so I joined the Discord and wasn't thinking of doing much other than, check out how they're setting up. Maybe I can throw them a tweet to support, et cetera. And they were asking all the right questions about how they do it operationally. And so I thought, well, I'll just take an evening, and I worked in a call center. I can give some advice on how to structure this. So gave some more advice. And then the next day was, I think, Friday in Japan. And I was like, well, work doesn't really need me for Friday. It's been a while since I've had a day off. I'll take a day off. And Friday stretched to Saturday to Sunday. And by Sunday or so, it was like, I really shouldn't be going back to working on, I was scheduled to do a blog post about server scaling, just the editing of it on Monday. And I was like, I really don't think that's the highest and best use of my time Monday at the moment. So I mailed some people at work and asked for permission to put some more cycles into it. And then one thing led to another. And about day 8 or so, I told everyone, look, we all came together in thinking that this was a hackathon style project. We just throw up a website. It's clearly something bigger than that. And it's probably the biggest thing that any of us are working right now. We should probably formalize this and try to increase the impact as far as we can push it. And so I became CEO of the effort, and then we started doing the more kind of well-trodden path of make a nonprofit, attempt to gather some money together, hire people, et cetera, and make a go of it. And then the history of time since then, a lot of stuff happened, and I'm sure we'll talk about it. But for the as early as day 10 or so, I was pretty sure it was going to go national, but we needed to sort of prove out the model in California first and convince other people that we knew what we were talking about and we're not just a bunch of technologists with no medical or epidemiological background. We still are a bunch of technologists with no medical or epidemiological background. But April 23rd, we launched the national site, and that has been growing quickly. We're up to about 60,000 locations nationwide now, which is about 50% more than any other public database. And I'm sure there's questions to dig into parts of that story. Happy to talk about as much of it as I can.
Definitely, and really interesting to kind of map out that trajectory from Carl bringing on some folks together on a Discord server to sort of 60,000 kind of vaccination sites in a database now. In your answer there, I really heard some themes around impact and leverage. I found those to be really salient. So how does the organization think about what leverage means and how you go about manifesting impact?
Sure. So the word ecosystem is going to come up a lot in this answer, and I don't want it to be a cliched use of the word ecosystem, but there are various different players in the vaccine effort. They all have different strengths and weaknesses, and they have different scales attached to them. For example, like the United States federal government, not a small institution, is devoting a not small portion of resources to like pay for the vaccination effort, to coordination with regards to like which vaccines go where, et cetera, et cetera. State of California, also not a small institution. And in the vaccination data ecosystem specifically, the publishers in the world that have the largest user bases possible have either those user bases are looking for the vaccine, or the publishers are trying to push out information about the vaccine to their user bases. And these are one publisher I could mention is Google Maps, because we're public on their page. You can imagine like who the other largest publishers in the world are. So when you think about leverage, what does Google have that the federal government does not? And what Google has is a sort of permission channel to talk to 200+ million Americans every single day. And the trust that if you were to poll people, and this poll has been done, people trust information they get from Google much more than they trust information from the federal government. What does the federal government have that Google does not? One is sort of formal authority to work on behalf of the American people in the United States of America. One is, well, an army, not relevant here. One is like trillions of dollars to dump onto public health. And then what does the federal government not have that Google has? The federal government can't write software on any useful time frame. So we are this like little link in the middle where we are technical enough to interface with Google and get them like quickly written software which will munge data together and expose it in a consistent API such that they can pull it out and push it out to 200 million people. And we are we have demonstrated sufficient credibility to be able to interface directly with the Blessed Federal effort, which is led by Boston Children's Hospital in collaboration with the CDC. And we take their data, we take our data, we do a merging process, we do a continuous update on it daily via calling about 4,500 locations a day to ensure that the ground truth is true. And then we send that to the publishers, and that's the primary source of your impact. We also have a website that we push the data out to. The existence of the website is largely something we do to keep our volunteers happy, because it's easy to tell a volunteer, like, look, when you call a pharmacy and hear a yes, that goes on the website in minutes. But the true source of our impact is largely not recruiting from 0 to 200 million users, but going to the people who already have 200 million users and working through them. Interestingly, a thing that the federal government, I would say, is not resourced to do. That's not true. A thing that the federal government does not have at the moment is the capability to verify the ground truth of information submitted to it by pharmacies. So they get the data might be good, the data might be bad, it's in their data set, but they don't have a call center operation to actually call and check. And we do have that call center operation, and we do actually call and check. And surprisingly to me, but I've heard it verified by every other large player in the ecosystem, the thing the ecosystem entirely lacked prior to us starting was someone actually checking that the data was accurate. When the day we realized that, we had always thought that a couple of weeks from now, the cavalry are going to come in and they're going to rescue this data from all the problems that we're seeing. And we started a meeting and we're like, bad news, guys, we're the cavalry. So it has been a wild, wild ride.
I can only imagine, and sort of with this cavalry metaphor, it seemed like one kind of advantage that you had in your personal story sounds like some experience with call centers. So sounds like you identified, well, if nobody's kind of checking the validity of this data, there's a need to be filled in there. How do you go from there to 4,500 calls a day to vaccination sites nowadays? I'm really curious to hear about the operational lens that you brought into that.
Sure. So and to be fair, I have limited experience with call centers. I paid for my university education by working at a call center during the summers, doing order entry for office supplies. So if you ever want to order pens, I know excellent ways to push through that order in as few seconds as possible. And I've worked in operationally intensive businesses. I had one of my software companies did several 100,000 appointment reminder calls, and Stripe's obviously an operationally intensive business. So I understand how the model works. I think one thing that technologists and government officials also don't appreciate about things is that call centers are ultimately just a numbers game. And when, like, if you've heard the term UG field, when you think of like, if someone proposes to you, you could get the truth of this situation by just calling every pharmacy in the state of California every day. Like, a lot of people immediately go, that's way too many calls to make. No team could ever do that. And if you have any sort of call center background, you think, well, there is a number for how many pharmacies there are. And then after that, it is just a math problem of how many reps I need, because these are entirely parallelizable calls. And the number of pharmacies there are in California is only like 5,000. So you're like, okay, if you do it every day, that's 50 agents. If you, depending on the call time, et cetera, and you probably don't need to do it every day. You can be more creative with your routing. So it might only be like 10 or 15 people to service the entire state of California. California is 10% of all the healthcare economy in the US. You do the math. This is much more achievable, and like 15 agents is nothing to the call center industry. Like, that's kind of sort of minimum contract size. So this is like very clearly a solvable problem if you apply this well understood technology to the problem of solving it. And so we went about and started doing that, first with sort of distributed volunteer call center with our volunteers, and then by onboarding both people working directly for us on a contractor basis, and now formal sort of professional call centers.
That kind of math breakdown of the problem is super illuminating, because I think I similarly would have had that reaction of like, too many kind of vaccination sites around the country. I want to kind of keep pulling on this thread, and maybe
if you mind if I interrupt you for 1 second there. This is the one thing most technologists didn't get about it was almost everybody that has sort of internet scale experience would be thinking in a like crowdsourcing direction. And every time we get called crowdsourcing, a little part of me dies, because the most important thing here is making sure that people have accurate and up-to-date information about life-saving medical treatments. And like crowdsourcing, if you have millions of reports and have years to work over them, you can kind of converge on the truth for like Yelp reviews, et cetera, et cetera. But it is very difficult to quickly converge on the truth of, if I go to, the Walgreens at 4th and King in San Francisco today, can I get vaccinated today? Where it is much easier to converge on the truth if you have a professional who's going through a script and they're doing it like it's their job, and then you have a second person called to verify that the next day, and you have a written policy for how those things are merged together into one sort of instantaneous sense of truth. Sorry to interrupt, but
no, that's super useful because it really clarifies how maybe a eventual or asymptotic convergence towards the ground truth is just not something that's going to kind of work in the pandemic timescale or the urgency of the needed response here. Mm-hmm. Let's kind of stay on this theme of maybe pointing out or clarifying misconceptions. I think one of my favorite personal, sort of to kind of play along with the title and genre of one of my personal favorite pieces of writing of yours, what have you seen are some falsehoods that programmers or technologists at large still believe about the pandemic response or the vaccine rollout?
Sure. So many things. Like, are we supply blocked on the vaccine rollout or demand blocked on the vaccine rollout is a critical question. And the answer is yes. If you were to like overlay a map of the United States and color it, is this region supply blocked or demand blocked? And then like have a time access to that map, there would be fascinating blobs of color moving across it for the last several months. So where in late December, we were supply blocked everywhere. Right now, we are supply blocked in some places and demand blocked in some places. And this is not what the national discourse tends to reflect, because the national discourse comes out of a very small number of places and a particular like crosscut of US society, you might call it the professional managerial class, where they have sufficient ability to navigate the systems to get the vaccine and sufficient vaccine availability locally such that most of the people in their offices and that they know personally, if they want it, have been vaccinated. But there are people living blocks away for whom that is not true. That gets written up as vaccine hesitance. But I don't think that is the true narrative either. It's in many cases, the activation energy to receive the vaccine is so high right now, or for like structural reasons, the vaccine isn't really available if you are working 2 jobs and don't have availability during a like weekday work windows, which is easy for the PMC to get access to because they can just tell their boss, I'm taking off an hour to go get a shot. And so that has been an undertold story in a year where a lot of people have been talking about vaccine equity. The vaccine equity piece is also like heavily intertwined with the story with like the structural reality of how healthcare is delivered in America. And if you could solve that by writing words about it, we as a society wrote a lot of words about it this year, but writing words doesn't cause pharmacies to creep up into existence. And pharmacies existed in the geographical pattern they existed this year because of the structural economics of healthcare. And even if we are, as a society, concerned with vaccine equity, but decide for operational reasons, pharmacies will have to distribute upwards of 50% of the vaccine doses in the United States, then there is basically no way to square that circle, at least through the pharmacy program. It requires other things to do. And for fascinating logistical reasons, the pharmacy program is managed by the feds, but the other things are managed by states and counties. And so you end up doing a operational competence check on states and counties, and ask me offline what I think about that sometime.
And speaking of these kind of structural realities that you've mentioned, I've seen you write about them too kind of these substantial geographic, socioeconomic, and other disparities in vaccine distribution across the state of California and across the United States at large. So we've seen that no amount of words in writing are going to kind of change that overnight. How do those realities impact the work of Vaccinate California, if at all, or how does that impact prioritization or energy focus?
Well, I'll give you an interesting example of a place where I was wrong on this. In the first 2 weeks of VaccinateCA, somebody said internally, we should really start localizing the site into Spanish and then as many languages as we can get to ASAP. And at the time, I thought, we have a cruddy data set for California, and we have a cruddy user experience on VaccinateCA.com, which was at the time the only surface that people could get information from us at. And I thought, our first priority is getting a better data set to get enough credibility to both collect more data sets from formal efforts and to get onto publishers. And that was far before we had worked our way up to Google. I've lived in Japan my entire adult life. I have substantial experience with software localization. And as our COO, who's the head of engineering, asked me, how has software localization hurt you before? But I thought, this is going to be several weeks of work, which will expose essentially zero user benefit in the current state of the website. So I pushed hard. I want to localize this website. I don't want to do it right now. And got a lot of pushback internally for sort of justice-oriented reasons. And I said, I understand your justice-oriented concerns, but just like being rigorous about the numbers and prioritization here, I would like to delay this by a couple of weeks. And I'm pulling out my CEO card to make that happen. And because volunteers don't necessarily need to answer to the CEO, one of them had literally overnight ripped out all of the non-localized code, replaced it with localized versions, and said, all right, just insert Spanish language text file here and we're done. I'm like, wow, okay, you're right. And so now we've localized into 8 languages, basically go top-down sort of which ones are most common in California. Interestingly, I was told we did try to do due diligence in the first day of this by calling up local health officers, et cetera. And one of them told me, oh, you tech bros, you don't understand anything about users the world over. You don't possibly understand that people speak multiple languages and that you'll need to localize this. And I'm saying this from a computer, which is currently displayed in Japanese because, so this was a very interesting conversation for me to happen. And I don't want to cast aspersions on any part of the effort for what they have or have not accomplished for localization efforts, but it was notable to me that this person, government official, was telling me, don't do X, even if X would be beneficial, unless you can do X perfectly. And I was pushing back with, I understand it won't be useful for Spanish speakers who don't have much English proficiency as of tomorrow, but that is not a reason to not do it tomorrow. It's a reason to get Spanish on the site as quickly as possible. And we had very different thoughts of like how baked something had to be before getting it up, or like what the minimum feature set for producing value was. And then interested internet users can look at the official efforts and see how many languages they're localized into if you want to compare versus 8. But I try to avoid direct comparisons like that.
I think it's fascinating to frame Vaccinate California as a startup, kind of with a core insight, a product, a go-to-market strategy, and a need for scale. Along those lines, it's commonly said that startups are theses. So what's been the core insight or thesis behind Vaccinate California?
The core thesis behind Vaccinate California is that there is a highly leveraged data problem lurking in the weeds of the larger vaccination effort, and that that data problem was being under-addressed by the vaccination effort. And if it were addressed, that would materially increase the rate at which shots entered arms. I think that we have basically proven out that thesis. Our internal estimates for the surfaces we control are that more than 100,000 people, as of a couple of weeks ago, had received a vaccine directly using data that they got from us. And then again, the surfaces which we control are a very small fraction of the people that see our data. So the there's an ecosystem, there's a patchwork of actors who are acting. We identified a small hole that had an extreme amount of leverage applied to it, and then we filled that hole and then started bridging gaps between these actors in the ecosystem.
What a kind of clear and kind of in-your-face evidence there about the potential for leverage with intercepting at that point where kind of the data problem becomes really needed.
Mm-hmm.
I guess one issue with this framing of Vaccinate California as a startup is that it has quite a unique set of circumstances and urgency, to say the very least. So
mm-hmm.
How have you all thought about the question of scaling or broadening your efforts, particularly around expanding from just California to now going nationally, and how you've invested around either the internal processes or tooling to enable that next level of scale?
So as soon as I had indicia that it was working that first week, I knew that if it could work in California, we should take it national. That was a minority viewpoint among the team for the first couple of weeks. One of the kind of learnable skills from startupdom is being able to understand and extrapolate from growth rates, and also understand which parts of the solution for California are pretty generalizable. And as someone who knows nothing about medical economics, very little about medical economics, epidemiology, et cetera, that you wouldn't learn from reading the newspaper every day, I felt I had sufficient understanding of medical delivery in the United States to understand that California and Oklahoma fundamentally have the same medical system. There's some differences in reimbursement patterns and state programs, et cetera. But if it's done in pharmacies in California, it is done in pharmacies in Oklahoma. And in many cases, those pharmacies are the same chain with the same logistics system, with the same phone tree, all of which happen to be important. So the big scaling question was essentially about how many calls can we do per day, and then what sort of systemic interventions can we make that would decrease the number of calls we need in a systemic fashion. One of those examples is can we get data directly from pharmacy chains? Can we get data directly from the government to avoid having to make as many feudal calls as we made? Feudal calls, great scrappy startup story. So a feudal call is when you call a location, they just don't have a vaccine, and your call is quote unquote wasted. And you might spend 5 minutes on the phone to get the pharmacist to hear, oh, sorry, we don't have it in stock. We made so many feudal calls in the early days when America was generally supply blocked. And we had this gong bot. So if any of you have worked in a sales organization before, sometimes there's a sales culture of getting up and ringing a gong when you get a customer to agree to give you money. So we had a gong bot that would play a chime for everybody in the organization anytime we discovered a vaccine. And the rush was on at 9:30 every morning to find our first vaccine for the day. And on bad days, it was 11 o'clock with dozens of people calling back to back to back before we found one dose of the vaccine. And one location with probably 60 doses of the vaccine. And anyhow, the experience of feudal calls is soul crushing, particularly when you're doing dozens in a row. They burn out volunteers, et cetera, et cetera. And so being able to do things like use other data sources to produce a prioritized list of leads, to have our callers call places that are more likely to find doses or more likely to find new information about doses is a core scaling challenge for us. The obvious next question about scaling is, okay, if we've done the vaccination data problem for the entire United States of America, can we apply this to countries outside the United States? that is still a big question for me, because while I understand that the delivery of medical care in the United States of America on a state-by-state basis is relatively consistent, that is broadly not true across nations. And it is not obvious to me that the hole that we identified in sort of the political economy and healthcare economy of the United States will exist without loss of generality. Japan, Europe, India, et cetera. We're still looking into that. We also have a resource in question. I'm currently putting together a funding round to get us enough runway to continue running this through the end of August, which we kind of model as the critical period for the pandemic in the United States. Still an open question on whether I successfully execute on that fundraising, but not clear to me what the shape of the organization would look like, or what our best way to contribute globally would be in a world where we expanded the sort of target to global. There's also a very real question about staff burnout, et cetera. We sort of sold people on a multi-month sprint, and many of us do have to get back to day jobs. My day job has been quite nice and giving me a unpaid leave for a number of months, but they would like to have me back and writing blog posts, et cetera, at some point. Those are some of the considerations that go into this. And it has been, I can't understate it, it has been a hard slog. We are on day 118, and many of us have been working substantially every day of that.
What a valuable slog and a kind of hard sprint there that keeps going, and I'm sure the sense of urgency doesn't change there. I'm gonna transition us over to zooming out a little bit and covering some startup themes more broadly. There's been some really great questions on the chat about Vaccinate California that we'll get to in the kind of audience questions in just a few minutes. So folks who are asking there, really excited to get to those in a few minutes. With the group today and the community at South Park Commons, a lot of people are in a stage of their kind of startup exploration journey where they're in an idea or pre-idea stage that is kind of accentuated by sometimes a lot of uncertainty and ambiguity around starting a new project. You've started a number of internet businesses yourself. How have you personally kind of navigated those very early days around exploring and uncertainty on whether your thesis is going to be proven out?
I did everything wrong the first couple of times. Beg pardon. So in my early businesses, I broadly speaking, without taking you all through the glory days of being the internet's bingo king, I attacked under-ambitious problems largely because I thought, okay, I know there's a need in the world. I know my technical skill set matches it. Yay. But didn't think of like, what is the sort of highest and best use of my time. Didn't have a rigorous process of, okay, let's, I did try to validate, to use the word everyone uses, like talk to people to see if they would buy the thing I built, if I hypothetically built it, and they said they would. But the real thing you're looking for if you are in a startup that is attempting to maximize its impact or maximize growth, et cetera, is to try to find like something which is the seed of something fantastic. And I produced viable businesses that were not the seed of something fantastic. And if I had been rigorous around understanding internally what I was hoping for, I probably would have optimized more for something that had more legs on it than the businesses that I ended up creating the first couple of times. The cliche about product market fit is that if you have it, you will know you have it. And if you have any difficulty in demonstrating if you have it, you don't have it. And I think everyone who has been in both sorts of businesses thinks that they understand that until they have actually seen it. They're like, nope, I was lying to myself. And I, like many people, lied to myself on previous iterations of this. I don't know if that is helpful advice, but the the user behaviors you see when you have product market fit will blow your mind. An example, there's a county in California who now embeds our map on their page to direct people in the county to vaccine locations in their county and in neighboring counties. And so the job that this solves for them is that there are people on the border who it is most convenient for them to go 2 blocks this way rather than 5 miles that way. But because counties don't talk to each other, they do not have a consistent feed of information right across the county border. So they asked us, could we make a map that they could embed on their webpage? And if we couldn't do it, they were going to hire some sort of consultancy to do it for them. And we said, yes, we could. And we came back the next day with a proof of concept, which was on staging.vaccinateca.com. And their engineer said, so I understand this is your staging server. This is so useful for us. I'm pushing it to prod now. Tell me when you have it on prod. So when engineers are pushing your staging server to prod, that is one of the things that demonstrates that you have solved the problem. The intentionally pushing the staging server to prod. The other things are like just the raw graphs. We were having early in VaccinateCA days with 100,000 users where the project had not existed a week before. And if you've ever tried to sort of grow things organically, you know that you typically spend months and months in obscurity before you can convince anybody to use it. And I don't know if this is kind of meandering, but that has been my experience of seeing both sides of this looking glass.
Absolutely, and I love that description of mind-boggling user behavior when you have product market fit. One thing that I find really interesting in your writing is that you have pretty specific advice in that a lot of founders should be charging more for their products. And from thinking about that piece of advice, it almost seems too specific, but it really does seem to apply across the boards. Products vary, costs vary, markets vary, but somehow this advice really seems to stick and be universally true. Why do you tell founders to charge more for their products?
Well, I will acknowledge the irony that I've been the charge more guy for many, many years. And now the most important work I've ever done is running a nonprofit, which is burning through its money as fast as possible while trying to drive the TAM to zero. But back into the world of making money with software. I think that founders and software people generally systematically undervalue our skill set. Being able to build things is a sort of magic, and people who are capable of doing magic underestimate how valuable magic is in the world. And the incredible, unbelievable amounts of leverage that we have as technologists who have the pick of all possible systems to implement and pick the right system to implement unlocks an amount of value in the world that doesn't scale in the same fashion as we typically think of our labor as scaling, or even of our businesses as scaling. And when you figure out the right place to sort of insert your efforts, the right way to package those efforts, the right way to sell them, the right organizations to sell them to, the amount of value produced by that is much more than super linear with your sort of natural anchorings for valuing, be that your last salary, what you think X units of your time is worth, et cetera, et cetera. And so you can charge to capture a portion of that leverage, a portion of the upside for yourself. The best businesses in the world, and I think this is a Guy Kawasaki quote originally, they create much more value than they capture. I think that is broadly true of Stripe, for example. Stripe's mission is increasing the GDP of the internet, and the business model is some portion of the GDP of the internet will flow through Stripe, and Stripe will take a small cut on those transactions. And Stripe is a very valuable company, but the aggregate of the internet economy is a much, much more valuable thing. But Stripe's unique contribution to it helps that internet economy grow at a faster rate than it would in a counterfactual universe in which Stripe did not exist.
We've come full circle in our discussion to this inspiring idea of leverage and really kind of the potential for impact if directed in an ambitious and kind of super linear value creating fashion. So I think this is a good chance to move over to kind of questions for the audience. But before we open it up for everyone's questions, Patrick, I wanted to ask you, how can the South Park Commons community help or get involved with VaccinateCA and Vaccinate the States?
Sure. So on VaccinateCA.com, if there is an About Us page that has instructions for volunteering, if that is something that you'd be interested in doing. We were previously sort of capacity blocked on the number of calls we can make per day. We're not capacity blocked on that at the moment. But if you have engineering skills and want to write scrapers to help ingest new data sources to get more leads into our system from across America, that would be something that we urgently need over the course of the next 1 to 3 weeks. I'm also putting together a $1 million funding round at the moment, slightly more than $1 million, 1 million that is uncommitted. If you know anybody that can contribute a sizable fraction of $1 million and want to introduce us and or write that check yourself, feel free to reach out to me. We're kind of intentionally not doing sort of retail scale funding, just to keep everything easy for everybody. The other thing that you can do, please help spread the word of the vaccine generally in your communities and places to find information about it, which would include VaccinateTheStates.com, or go to Google, go to any of the places. As wild as this is, we basically back all of them. So that isn't strictly speaking true. We back a large fraction of them weighted by user count. Yeah, and thanks very much for attending, everybody, and I would love to answer your questions.
Thanks very much, Patrick. So anyone in the audience that has a question or has previously written in the chat, feel free to chime in. Looks like we have about 13 more minutes for questions.
I'm sorry, one moment while we look through questions. Spam call. Hey.
Spam call.
The joys of having a phone roaming internationally is that all calls are from an unknown number, and so it's either my family or a spam call. Okay, do you want to pick a question for me to answer first, or should I pick?
Yeah, I saw a really interesting discussion around involving like Jared, Coleman, and Joshua around kind of the applicability of the effort, the VaccinateCA effort beyond the current pandemic situation and more globally. So, what do you see as the sustainability of this initiative, and from the resourcing standpoint, how do you kind of prepare for thinking through the sustainability question?
So originally in sort of the first week, we thought, okay, we will be the VaccinateCA team. We'll try to inspire other people to be the Vaccinate, insert 2 letters here team, and sort of, I would say franchise the model, but not have like the sort of oversight that McDonald's does at franchises. And the thing that we came to learn over the next couple of months is that the willingness of technologists to come in and do a few days of hacking, get up a website, put bins on the map, et cetera, was high. But the capability of folks to like come in day after day, week after week, and pick up the phone hundreds of times to call pharmacies in their state was, there was a lot of enthusiasm in week 1, less enthusiasm in week 2. Week 3 came around and people just couldn't sustain it. And so of the numerous sibling projects that VaccinateCA had, most of them ended up dying on the vine unless they were essentially completely automated scraper-based operations, which have their own set of challenges, not germane here. And so the we sort of uniquely among these projects actually made the transition to being a nonprofit and tapping funding sources to be able to employ people and then employ professional callers to make professional calls. So that sort of like availability of money as a sustaining agent is something that is probably important for any organization that is trying to do this internationally. The amount of money is much less than you would expect. Call centers, they have successfully driven down the price of calls. To give you a comparable here, there was a large piece of consulting where, and I'm blanking on the actual name of it, that was created for the federal government to be sort of the, it's VERS or something, to be the central hub for all data exchange about the vaccination effort. You can read in your newspaper of choice about the story of the rollout of that, but the upshot was that it has largely gone unused due to any number of problems with it, and states and counties have been ripping it out and replacing it with things like Eventbrite, et cetera, point solutions, not the sort of one ring to rule them all that was originally RFP'd and then pitched by the consultancy. That piece of software cost $44 million, which is probably 22x what our operational cost for running for the length of the pandemic. It's a relatively small amount of money by the scale of like national governments or the tech industry. But $2 million is a relatively large amount of money by what, you know, a group of interested friends probably have in their back pocket. And because it scales with the core drivers or cost are the ground truth of number of locations that you have, and the sort of like how much data is available currently to get to those locations. The better data sources you have and the fewer you have to ingest, the less engineering work you need to do, and the more effective your callers will be. It might be sort of disproportionately expensive in a country like India, for example, where the sort of available data sources might be lower quality. And of course, the size of the healthcare economy in India, measured by number of locations, is probably at least 5x as large as the is in the United States.
Absolutely. I see a question from Tamina. Tamina, are you able to share your question with us?
Sure. I'm curious. I feel like there are a lot of data leverage opportunities because governments and NGOs have tons of data. But outside the pandemic, you haven't seen that many successful organizations like VaccinateCA and US Digital Response. So I'm curious, what is your perspective? Does COVID open the door to projects like this because we just never mobilized? Or do you think the mobilization of tech people to volunteerism is a one-off? It's just the way we reacted to this particular pandemic.
I think this is one of the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed. Love that quote. I would bet heavily against this being the last time that data-driven projects have a high amount of leverage in the world. I think that there was a somewhat unique circumstance here in that there was a clear time-bounded need, which made it very easy for myself and other people to say, okay, I don't intend to do NGO management as my career going forward, but I can do it for a couple of months, sure, if that is necessary to save literally hundreds of thousands of lives. There was an identifiable point of leverage in that we needed to alter user behavior across essentially the entire population, where that population had a sort of limited number of places where they could get information, and where there was an obvious undersupply in the market for that information. And so that was like a sort of time-bounded and idiosyncratic need with a huge impact applied to it. But there are, if there was a problem affecting 1/6 or 1/12 of the United States. 1/12 of a country is still a huge number. And there are, one could imagine things like, for example, benefits access or similar problems where for a variety of political economy reasons, the basic things that you would do if you were a project manager at Google attempting to increase adoption of your product have not yet been done. And so I could imagine there being interesting things done there in the future.
Could I ask a follow-on on that one?
Go ahead.
So I think that all makes sense. I'm wondering very specifically about taking India as an example right now. It's an amazing cost right now, and it seems like it's, from what I'm talking to friends, it seems like a lot of it is not complete absence of supply of certain medical things. It's logistics and coordination and a lot of tragic, happenstance that is leading to a lot of deaths. Do you think your approach one of the most high leverage activities might be to mentor teams in other places like that and actually begin to teach them some of the same intersectional skills to be able to have a small team in India focusing on oxygen or something like that? I was wondering if you have considered that.
We've been chatting with a couple of teams and trying to sort of giving them the brain dump on what we've learned, how we structure operations, et cetera. There are, you've probably noticed me be relatively careful with what I've said about our government partners in the United States on this call. Maybe not as careful as I should have been in some places, but political economy questions do end up being quite relevant both to the overall effort and to the ability of any organization to impact the overall effort. We talked to some friends who were in a position to know about some of the political questions in India and got the strongest possible wave off with regards to citizen-led teams interfering with some of the efforts there, and the people in a position to know, in addition to giving the strongest possible wave off, were quick to mention that it is not the case in every country in the world that a group that causes embarrassment to the government will structurally have no issues that affect their personal safety as a result of that. So that is also something that we've been telling to people on if hypothetically this were a massive success in India, that would be a major success. And also the risk of being arrested or having violence against your person is not zero if you choose to pursue this, which is a sad commentary on the state of the world, but we live in the world we live in rather than the one we wish we live in. Jason Crawford asks, what can effective altruism learn from this as a case study? So I have a very interesting question, sub-question on this, which is taking the United States and India because they've come up in this conversation. Pharmaceutically, the impact of the last day of US vaccine supply being used on the United States is 1/1000th of the impact of the first day of the vaccine supply being used on a nation that has not yet vaccinated its older population. And how would one, as a effective altruist, justify our operation at all versus merely directing the last part of the vaccine abroad as soon as possible? I don't exactly identify with effective altruism myself, but I understand where it's coming from. One of the things that I would say to someone coming from that sort of moral/philosophical tradition is like we live in the world we live in. Political economy questions will dominate the question of when the United States makes the decision to release its manufacturing capacity to the rest of the world, and that our efforts to accelerate this as quickly as possible in the United States brings forward that date by a day, a week, 2 weeks, and that the impact of bringing that date forward by 2 weeks is equivalent to running a current steady state COVID pandemic in the United States for 6 years, or whatever, 1,000 times 2 weeks. Somebody can check me on the math there. 20 years? Sorry.
So that's a really interesting perspective, but I was actually coming at it from a little bit different angle, which is like from a slightly different angle. This could actually be considered like a massive EA success. Like you found a way to sort of do a lot of good for very like relatively small dollars. And yet it's sort of interesting, like that this didn't come out of any of the major EA foundations or projects. It didn't even come from someone who, like you say, maybe identifies personally with the philosophy or the movement. So like, is there, so I'm just kind of curious, I don't know, are there any lessons out of that? Is there something, like the EA folks are very deeply reflective and philosophical, like, you know, they like to ask themselves questions like, how did we miss this? Or should we have thought of this? Or like, so I'm kind of curious, like, maybe is there something, like, is there an angle that the EA movement doesn't think about things from that would have led them to come up with this? You see what I'm getting at?
Yep.
Not to put too fine a point on it. I mean, obviously a lot of these things are sort of very contingent and like, right? But I'm just curious.
I think the interesting thing is that that like constant search for leverage that startups are engaged in, and particularly, I guess both the constant search for leverage and also needing a little foresight, not a huge amount of foresight, but a little foresight in like, if I do 100 experiments and one has, you know, in the first week, the seeds of something great, being willing to immediately pour all the possible resources on that. Not that the world or the tech industry poured all the possible resources on us in week 2, but we were, I'll give you a number. We had, as of week 2, I was pretty confident in committing to the team that I could find them 15 full-time people and $500,000 by making a bunch of calls. And both of those things were accomplished. And that is probably not the trajectory of most citizen projects or NGOs on week 2. Particularly when dealing with something as fast moving as the pandemic, there were many attempts by the tech industry and others to alleviate the pandemic in various places in various ways. I did one myself last year in Japan, and the one thing that distinguishes us is, and this is in no way implied criticism of any other effort, but that like quickly identifying the seed of something that would scale from a citizen-led project in one particular community to nation scale, and then investing resources accordingly is something that maybe the EA folks could put in the tool set. Also identifying, and again, leverage. You know, if you can sort of swing the operations and swing the effectiveness of an organization, which is literally millions of times your size, that is that's an awesome fulcrum to have available. And my sort of background reading on EA is that they often end up in investing in things like bed nets, for example, which are the cost performance of them is pretty great, but in some ways you might think like, what would be an investment of resources that would cause a organization many millions of times your size to do the thing that you would do if you were a million times bigger than you were. And so that might be an interesting thing for them to think through. And to me, has a nice comment on thinking about advocacy campaigns, but the evidence is so murky. One of the things that I worry about constantly is whether people are doing the right thing or doing the thing that talking about seems great. And I try to keep us as an organization focused on actually getting shots in arms versus talking about getting shots in arms and talking my own book there. It is about 12:05 and I will have to get to other meetings, but I really appreciate everyone's time and coming out for today. I had a nice time chatting about it. And if I can ever do anything for you, hopefully after the pandemic, please drop me an email and would love to chat about any related topics at any time.
Thank you, Patrick, for the great discussion and for spending part of your morning with us. I sincerely wish you all achieve that goal of driving your temp to zero as fast as possible. Thanks for joining and thanks for all the work you're doing.
Yep. And if you have anything relevant to this topic, Patrick at VaccinateCA.com is my main email address for this. Would love to direct you to the right person to help based on any way you want to get involved. Really appreciate your time, everyone. And thanks very much for coming out.
Thanks, Patrick.
Thank you.
All right.